going to go ahead and get started because I know you have a lot of material to cover.
Yeah.
So if you're just joining us, my name is Carissa Figgins. I'm the Executive Director of Community Strong, and we are a health and wellness coalition commissioned by BJC St. Peters County, SSM St. Charles County, I said St. Peters County, BJC St. Charles County.
New county.
SSM St. Charles County, Mercy, St. Luke's, and the Economic Development Council of St. Charles County. And when COVID hit, we kind of looked at each other and it's like, there's so much noise, there's so much confusion, there's so much information flying. What can we bring to the table that would be of value to people? And as you're signing on, you can see a poll that's popped up to rank on a scale of 1 to 10 of how hopeful do you feel about the future, especially as we talk about COVID. So our team got together and said, what do people need the most right now? We need to have resiliency. And so this is the last of a 4-part webinar series that we have hosted on resiliency. So we've had everything from how to build resiliency from a senior management and leadership position, how to build resiliency up in children, how to have resiliency as caregivers and to avoid compassion fatigue. And then we are wrapping up the webinar series today with Jeremy Nulik to talk about what resiliency will look like in the future, and not the so far distant future, but sometimes what we're thinking about today is what's the next few minutes, the next few days going to bring in. So I know Jeremy's going to provide some very specific tools of what we can do. So as I go through the introduction, if you will take part in that poll, and let me tell you a little bit about my good friend, Jeremy. I'm just going to read his bio because it shows you a lot about the personality that you're about to interact with. So Jeremy exists to nurture a space for imagination. He does this by crafting narrative-driven, hopefully unforgettable experiences for people who are trying to face accelerating change or deal with crisis. His mission is to inspire people to reveal compelling possibilities that seem unknowable in the present moment. He does this because he desires a future in which imagination is understood as fundamental to lasting change. Big White Sky is his place of employ. He works there as a strategist and a futurist. He is an amazing strategist. He has an amazing wife and children and people in his life that love him even when he makes it hard. And he is one of my very, very dear friends who has taught me a lot about resiliency in personal life and professional life. And so I will gladly share the stage with my dear friend, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction. Thank you for asking me to do this. I listened in on a couple of your previous ones, and the leaders that you selected they were wonderful, you know. Especially and now I'm blanking on the guy's name. The first one,
Casey Graham.
That was remarkable, you know. Because he did a really good job at framing up, like, you know, here's the thing that everybody's facing, and it really hurts, and but he had some practical ways that he had dealt with it, and he really exhibited, you know, resiliency, which isn't that different than anything that I have to cover today necessarily. All this is a set of some tools. So I'm going to share a screen and get right into it if I can, and we'll see how well. Host disabled attendee screen sharing. Hey, can I co-host? Can I share a screen? So I think probably, and I think the first thing to talk about here is that you're going to need a pencil or something. So this is a set of activities. It's a set of some thinking, and making notes to yourself is going to help. And if you want to do that because you like open a Word document, or you have a pen or a pencil, that would be ultimately what we're going for. But essentially, you know, the important thing to take away from this is that your resiliency in this moment, and this was true before this COVID stuff hit, really has to do with how well can you allow for emerging thoughts, ideas, notions to come to you, ones that maybe don't seem as obvious. So how well can you tap into a mindset that will allow you to see those opportunities, that will allow you to fuse things together that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. And so cultivating that kind of mindset is really what this is about. I think that probably the largest misconception we have about the future is that we think that the future is a point on the horizon at which we would arrive. And that, of course, is a complete construction of ours, right? I mean, the future actually doesn't exist. There isn't really a future. What we have are a series of images in our minds about the things that, maybe notions of things we'd like, um, maybe even ways that we would like this presentation to go. If you have kids, you think about them hitting their milestones. So you have these images you're carrying around with you every day. And they do have an impact on your behavior. And so the thing that we're going to do today is we're going to say, well, if that's true, if the future really is this kind of liminal space in my head that I carry around like thoughts and images, then I want to cultivate those. I want to be mindful in what images am I cultivating, and I can use some of the rigor that futurists have applied for decades to how I'm going to shape those things. So I don't have to go around guessing. And I don't have to be scared of thinking about the future. So I think that another main takeaway here is our brains work against us when we're trying to deal with crisis. When you're trying to deal with something or lean into the unknown, you should just know your factory settings are not well suited for dealing with that sort of thing. It's why it hurts. It's why it's hard. It's why, when things like this hit, we have this kind of this moment in our culture, even collectively, that it's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So I wanted to outline specifically just why it's bad. So also just so you don't feel too alone in this, but we're optimized for our circumstances. Our brains are optimized to deal with whatever's happening right now, to take in the maximum amount of information for that. This is a really good trait to have when you're hunter-gatherers, and it's maybe not so great when you're no longer having to deal with life on those terms. And we're really good at finding what's wrong. And before you go skipping to thinking, yeah, I know someone who does that, you do this too. So you are optimized to figure out what's wrong with something or where there are mistakes. Digging a little deeper into this, the thing one, that whole we're optimized for our circumstances, to even exhibit that for you in this moment, I want you to think about you plus 10 years. So if you have that pencil out or that Word doc, take your age, add 10 years, so add a 1 to the tens column. Think about who that person is, just instinctually. And then I want you to do a very brief thought exercise, again, instinctually, on who that person is. So I want you to think of who is that person physically. Think about how you appear 10 years from now, physically. For me, it's a lot more salt all through here, there's a lot of thoughts I probably could go through. So, and I want you to think about also your home. So after you get done thinking about yourself physically, what's your home like? What does it feel like? Who's there? If you have kids, they're 10 years older too. Are they still there? Are you living in the same place? And I want you to think just briefly about what might be better. Carissa would be 56, wrinkled skin, and an empty nester. So, but think about what might be better. In addition to all those things, Carissa, what might be better about you 10 years from now? So when you did that, even if it was instinctual, just briefly, even if you didn't write anything down and you just did it in your mind, when you thought about that person, I want you to understand something about the way you thought about yourself. You thought about a stranger to yourself. The thing that you did when you did that, when you projected yourself out into the future, you actually used a set of accessing images and sort of nervous activity in your brain that you would normally reserve for a complete stranger. So I think this is the nerdiest slide I've got, but if you follow the white line on this fMRI scan of someone's mind, that is how you think about your current self. So those are the areas of your brain that are activated when you think about your current self. So Carissa, if you were thinking about you present day, and the things that you're dealing with and plugging in your computer and the hopes and dreams you have and the values you have, that's the curve that you use there. When you think about your future self, it's that green line. And that actually more so exhibits the same behavior that you would about a current other, right? It's almost the same pattern in your mind. So the other thing to keep in mind when you do this is we're also optimized to, at first, not necessarily trust people who are strange or others. We usually wait for proof that we actually are aligned values-wise with those people. So you can draw from this conclusion that you don't even trust your future self. So that person you thought of 10 years from now that you outlined and thought about what might be better is someone you don't know and you don't trust. And this also makes sense as to like, why is it so hard when it comes to your fitness goals? Like, why not just watch Netflix now? Why am I going to try to do things to myself physically to make myself better if I don't even like the future self? And so why not just watch Netflix? If I needed projects done at home, why am I going to do that for my future self? Why would I finish that if I can do other things? Financially, why am I going to give money to a stranger? You know, I'm not going to do that. I would like to give money to myself. And this is why it is in business or in organizations, people think about the short term and they think about what can we get done now? We're optimized for circumstances. This is just part of our default factory setting. This is just the way it is. That's what you're dealing with. Thing two, we're going to talk about the idea that you're also optimized to think about what's wrong. So given the current COVID thing and all of the, you know, the drama that's gone on around the seniors this year having to miss their graduation ceremony and other rites of passage, I would like you to think of your high school prom. Don't think too much about it, just the first images that come to mind when you think of your high school prom or high school proms in general. And this, I have no real data to back this up. This is just Jeremy doing a very non-scientific anecdotal survey of my friends. So here are the results. And I asked people to think of things, you know, maybe you thought of your date, maybe you thought of the dance, maybe you thought of dances, maybe you thought of the after party, maybe you didn't even go to prom. All of those things might have been the images. But here were the non-scientific results I got from people. When I asked them to think of their high school prom, they thought of not getting the date they wanted. They thought of something awkward or stupid that they did at the dance. That there was at least 2 crying in the parking lot. I don't know. Crying in parking lots is a common thing that happens with proms. So why is this? Why do we do this? Why do we have this sort of, like, prom is supposed to be fun, right? It's supposed to be a rite of passage, and it's like this huge deal. Entire films are based around taking place at the prom. Culturally, we place a lot of significance on it. So why do we think about what's wrong first? Well, because it turns out that one of the things that is true and almost agreed upon singularly by most psychologists is that we have a negativity bias. And again, before you think, yeah, I know someone who's like that, you're like this too. So you are, your factory settings are such that you will find what's wrong. You will find something that hurts. It's why it is, if you ever sit in a performance review and they did that garbage to you where they gave you the 2 positive things first and then they gave you the negative one, those 2 positive things are gone now. The only thing you're thinking about is the thing that you were supposed to improve. And you don't really care about the other positive thing that they're supposed to close it with because you're so stuck on the fact that they told you you did something wrong. Again, the person who's done probably the most work on this is Roy Baumeister, a social psychologist, founder of positive psychology. You know, so the mind evolved to overreact to negative things. So to compensate for that, it's good to take a moment to stop and consider the positive. And this isn't like toxic positivity. This is intentional positivity, right? It's at least getting some balance to what is it that what could be right, you know? And so the point is that when you're in a crisis, you will, and you're asked to be resilient and you're asked to be open to emergence and new ideas. Well, all of those things are associated with an openness to thinking. All of those are associated with kind of an opportunist sort of mind, at least some degree of positivity. And if your factory settings are to focus on circumstances and in particular what's wrong, it's very difficult to think in a way that you can manage liminally, right? So bottom line is you suck at thinking about the future, and you don't suck singularly, everybody does. And our very brains work against us. So the point of what we can do today and why you're here is that hopefully you want to achieve, you know, something bigger than you. You know, you joined in with this. You agreed either because Carissa twisted your arm or because you want to do something in the world. Even if that's something you want to do is to build a good life for your family. You know, and you want it to live beyond the present. And so to do that, what we're going to do today is to help you to build some empathy for your future self. If you can start to do that, if you can start, instead of when you casted that vision of the person 10 years older than you, if you can start thinking of that person as someone you like, someone with whom you can trust, build trust, then you can hopefully start to see opportunity. The practice we're going to borrow from largely is foresight. I mean, these are the things that we'll go through today are largely borrowed from futurist thinking. And that is a discipline that has a lot of rigor behind it. Like I said, a lot of study of how do people cast images of the future. And so, you know, what we're going to deal with, though, more specifically, instead of thinking about this from a systems perspective or organization perspective or a community perspective, we're going to make it very personal. So this is going to be a chance for you to practice this kind of thinking on you, with the understanding that you could do this with your kids, with your spouse, with your community you care about, with your organization, whatever. So we're going to borrow these three techniques that from Jane McGonigal, who's a futurist at the Institute for the Future. She uses these techniques herself. She uses them with her students that she teaches, and when she teaches courses on strategic foresight. So these are, she calls the trifecta of simulation, and they're particularly effective in terms of getting yourself into a headspace that's more liminal, that's open to new ideas. So we are going to start with predicting the past. We're going to go to remembering the future, and then we're going to practice some hard empathy. So that's going to be what we run through today, and it'll be, like I said, this first run through that you do with me during this, you know, webinar time we've got might be a little bit truncated. You know, it'll be a little shorter, but hopefully what you can take with you is that you will have a framework you can use when in the future you're feeling like you're not open to enough new ideas, or when you need to simulate something new for yourself, because right now it feels too complex and too hard to understand what's happening. And the reason that we use the term simulation really is also important. Like, these focus on creating essentially an alternative version of yourself. And the idea with that is to get your head in a space, like I said, to think that there's more that's possible than maybe what appears in this present moment. And that can seem scary to some people, but another futurist friend of mine, Jake Dunnigan, is famous for saying, you know, it's better to be surprised during a simulation than blindsided by reality. And I think all of us can feel like what it feels like to have that last part of the sentence happen to us, given what's happened today. So what we're going to do is to build in some disciplines for ourselves so that we can be surprised when we simulate something for ourselves and disrupt ourselves enough that when something disruptive arrives, when reality shifts on us, we're not as, you know, blindsided. We know we have, you know, a way that we can think about it. So I'm going to jump right into the activities that we're going to go through. And man, there's some, I've just looked at the chat. There's just some sad prom memories that are there. We're going to jump right into the first one. And you're going to, you know, these can feel a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and, it feels a little life coachy. And they might feel, they're tools that therapists have used before as well. So, but you know, they are useful in that you will simulate a different version of yourself. So the first step actually in all of these is to kind of suspend some disbelief that this is pointless or worthwhile or a needless exercise. And then the next step would be this. So this morning you woke up and there was like a glow on your phone and it woke you up. You were in a dark room, hopefully, and you were sleeping nicely, and you woke up and your phone went off and it woke you up. Instead of that happening, instead of after that happening, you getting ready for your day and doing whatever it is you do, I want you to pretend like you got out of bed and you started to pack a bag. And so I would like for you to visualize, and you can make notes to yourself if you'd like to, you don't have to. Visualize loading up a bag with some supplies, but there's supplies for you to go on a trip, a safe trip, you know, a trip that you're not going to catch, you know, viruses or anything like that, but to somewhere that you love, to somewhere that you really would like to be, somewhere that that maybe feels warm to you. So pack a bag, start doing that in the morning. This is this alternative version of you today. So you're going to go on a trip. You're going to go somewhere you love. So think about where that location might be. Think about what you might be putting in that bag right now, or that you had put in the bag. And to complete this exercise, to complete the technique, I would like for you to think about where the alternate you is right now. So if you were to wake up this morning, pack a bag, get in your car, get on a bicycle, get on your roller skates, and go wherever it is you were going to go, where is that person now? And you don't have to answer out loud. Just make some notes to yourself. Think about where that is. Think about what's around you. Do you have a podcast playing on the radio and you're flying down 44 to go to the lake? Or what are you doing? So, yeah, I don't know, Carissa, if you want to unmute or something and just share what it is you're thinking, that's fine with me.
You know, it's not clear in the chat box what I'm thinking. I'm addicted to BritBox, which is BBC shows, and there's this show that my husband and I have been watching for weeks, and it's in the fictional spot of Saint Marie in the Caribbean, and it's the characters there and the just regulars, they're just lovely people, and it's a beautiful empty beach. There shouldn't be that many murders that often on this island. But just the characters and that flow of life of just no time and just things happen as they need to happen. And the inspector lives on kind of a shack on the beach that is just loves it. Just love it.
That's trippy. A fictional beach.
Apparently it's based on Antigua, but Saint Marie does not exist on any map. And I think that's why it's so pleasing to me that it doesn't really exist, that no one could find you there.
So if you were to try to, if it did exist in the Caribbean, let's say, where would you be right now? So it's 12:26.
So I would still be in that shack on the beach having some sort of fruity beverage.
Fair enough.
Just water, wind, palm trees.
The prom king that was referred to in the prom story that was above in the chat lives in Antigua. So it's all coming full circle. This is like Inception already. And I was also corrected on my geography. I did 70 goes to the lake. Thank you, Victoria. Can tell I'm not a native. Well, as trippy as Carissa's version is, the point of doing something like this is to reveal the degree to which today is contingent. A lot of times it feels like we arrived at today because we didn't get to make the choices. Like today feels like it arrived at us. When that alarm clock goes off, it feels like the present day arrived at you. And particularly if it's challenging, particularly if you're in a crisis sort of moment. It's important though, even in those moments, to have that kind of "this is a wonderful life" sort of understanding. Today exists because, and you exist as you do today, because you made choices, right? You made some decisions. You have agency. So you can shape future events with today's choices. So if you could have had an alternate version of yourself, if you'd begun today differently, then that means that future events will be shaped by today's choices. Intellectually, this is not difficult to understand. Most people, if you tell them this, know this, but few people actually live this way, right? And if you're going to be honest with yourself, it's probably not likely you do either. A lot of us live every day as though the future or the present day arrived at us, and not as though, well, we have agency. I made choices. I get to sit here at my kitchen table and have a fun session with some folks, surrounded by my wife and my kid, and we get to talk about how we can think about the future better. So those things exist because we made choices. And then that means that I can make different choices today that would lead me to some different futures. It's possible, right? I don't know what those choices might be right now, but at least I know it's possible. So I'm going to jump right into the next one because I want to make sure we get through all of these. So remembering the future, if you have your notepad out or your document, I want you to draw an X. And next to the X, I want you to put something you love to do. So this could be running, writing, hanging out with your family, whatever it is. Try to name the top thing that came to your mind instinctually when you thought about something you love to do. And then right below the X, write a Y and write someone you care about. And this needs to be someone you know. You don't pick like your favorite Cardinals baseball player or something. This is someone you care about deeply that you know. So the first person that comes to mind when you think of that. Below that, I'd like you to write a Z and write a place you love. I would challenge you to make it a place that exists. It doesn't need to, but make it some place that does exist, the place you love, the first place you thought of. Maybe it's under a tree, somewhere in a park, whatever it is. Be as specific as you can. Think about a place you love. And then, as you might have guessed, this simulation, you complete this technique when you're able to create a scenario in the past. So this could be 5 years ago, 10 years ago, what have you. Could be last year, but it needs to take place in the past. And this scenario combines X, Y, and Z. So this says, I did something I loved with someone I care about in a place I love to be. And once you've done that, you've completed the technique. And make the scenario as accurate as you can in terms of really make it something that you feel like could have happened. And you can post your results in the chat, or you can, I don't know if you can raise hand and say you want to talk. I didn't really go through precisely how we might review these, or I can call upon Carissa or any of the other community strong plants to share theirs. The Jeremy not presenting guy, or Thomas.
So this is Carissa. I should probably do my video too. Hi.
Hi.
Just kidding. So my first was just, I love to read. And then I had a very dear friend that came to mind. And then the lake at Legacy Park, which is just right here in Cotterville. And I can't say that all those three things have happened together, but there are pieces of them that created a memory, and definitely something that I'd like to do in the future.
Right, but yeah, exactly. So if 5 years ago you were sitting next to that lake with your friend, you both had books out, if it was maybe even last year. Completely plausible though, right? Like that could have happened. Right? And that was a really...
I poke you that I had to think of a real place and not a fictional place on a map that doesn't exist.
And you can. It's just, I think it's the plausibility thing, right? So this is like, the whole, the central tension point in Total Recall, right? Is, were those memories real, or did they get planted inside of his head, and how much does that matter, right? I know that you love Total Recall so much. So
right, that's a movie that people totally associate with me. But
Arnold Schwarzenegger films.
But I'm going to put a friend on the spot because I just feel like she'd be all right with that. But Victoria, would you feel comfortable in sharing the things that you wrote? And do you have...
Damn you.
And I don't know, Actually, I don't know enough about this. Thomas, do we have to unmute, or does Victoria just use the chat box?
Yeah, let me fix this up. There we go. There's Victoria. She can talk if she's so wants to.
So Victoria, oh, there you go.
Yes, here I am. It took me a while. So yes, Jeremy, when you said that, the thing that I love to do, one of the most things I love to do that has been taken during COVID is travel. Travel both with business and with family. And then the people that I love to travel with are my husband and daughter. And then in terms of a destination, the mountains or the sea came to my mind simultaneously.
Great. So but it's completely plausible that even last year you could run through a scenario where y'all packed up and decided to head to Colorado together.
Yes.
It's completely plausible, right?
Yes. And I think that makes the current situation all the more difficult because, you know, you envision this, we had plans to travel, and then at this point, the uncertainty, we don't know when we'll be able to do that again. And so I think that's really, that reality is infringing on this memory and this mind that I have.
Sure. Right. Right. And I think that if you can, I mean, I don't know, maybe even last year you did that. Maybe you're actually, when you were first asked or prompted to do this, the first things you thought of were things that actually had happened, you know? So you thought of times that you were all together with your family and you had that excitement, sort of anticipation that goes along with we're headed out to a place, right? At least I'm making that assumption, you know,
Yeah.
that's part of the magic of it is it's like, oh man, we're going somewhere, you know? And so I think one of the things that you can take away from when you put yourself in that headspace is that was the part that you're going for. You know, the outcome produced by having that memory or from planting that memory is that you get to feel that excitement, the anticipation of what could be, you know? And I think that that's part of the design of why it is you would even do this in the first place, is that if it could have happened, if it's plausible that it could have happened, then that means maybe there are things that we could be doing now that could produce the same effect. They might not be exactly those. You can't make the same recipe, you know? Like I mean, I sadly, when I did this, it actually backfired on me once because when I asked someone to think of someone they care about, they thought about a dog they had that had died. And so then I like triggered this sort of like thing that can't be in the future, right? But the thing that they did feel was this warmth and connection with this animal, you know, and something that they loved very much, something they loved doing very much. And so if you can think that this is plausible, that could have happened, then that means maybe more things are plausible than it would seem. Like right now, it feels like things are very restrictive, but maybe there is more possible than we know, right? Maybe there's more possible than it would seem. Because again, part of doing this is that if you cultivate these images, and maybe if they are a category that maybe there's something you didn't really experience, then they become more plausible as a real memory, you know? The fact that this took place or that I can think that this could have taken place makes it more plausible in my head. It makes it more possible. And the images that you carry around, they have an impact on your behavior. So if you're carrying around images that just feel like things are impossible, here's all the things I can't do, here are my limitations, and if your images are focused on that, you will behave in a way that's in alignment with those limitations. If you cultivate images that aren't that way, that have some possibility, you know, Similar to even what you're saying, Victoria, you know, you wouldn't take those moments then for granted. So you would be given a different gift, and you can carry that around with you every day. And you can begin to see, well, actually, there are times that we do feel excitement together. Maybe it doesn't look the way I'd like it to, but man, I can hold on to that feeling because I'm not going to take that feeling for granted. And this idea of like images impacting your behavior might sound a little bit, like I said, life coachy, but there is science that backs this up. And there's actually one of the first futurists was a guy named Fred Pollock. He survived the Holocaust and lived on to create a lot of the frameworks that futurists use. And he even says that those images are so powerful that especially when they ladder up to the level of culture or organization, that the rise and fall of images of the future precedes or accompanies the rise and fall of cultures. So if collectively what we have is a series of sort of hopeless, you know, sorts of scenarios, then we will live as though we are hopeless. If we can cultivate a sense that, well, there might feel like there are hopeless images I have, and I can acknowledge those. And at the same time, here's a set of images that aren't so hopeless. I can live in that way too. Those things are possible, you know, and even just that crack, even just that possibility sometimes is enough to shift our thinking. So that was, right, that was remembering the future. So last exercise, and then I'm only running through these quickly, so because I want to give, if there is Q&A, I wanted to give people time to ask questions about it. For this last one, I just want you to take a look at this image. And you should, I can't see you necessarily, so my assumption is that what will generally happen when I show people an image like this is they will actually start to smile back at the person that you see, because it's very easy for you emotionally to know what that feels like. You have known at some point, at least I hope, you've known joy, right? You've known unbridled happiness. You've known that level of excitement. You can relate to that, right? And so what this is often called is, as actually what I'm going to use today anyway, is to call it easy empathy, right? And easy empathy is sometimes called emotional empathy. And it means that my body and mind are familiar with what that looks and feels like. And so I can emulate that and I understand what that means. That's not at all what we're talking about today. So the only reason I wanted to show that to you and set all that up is to tell you that ain't it. That's not what we're talking about. So what we want to talk about today is actually something called hard empathy. And again, positive psychologists call it hard empathy. And here's the reason why, is that I think that particularly now, if we're going to be honest, then you know, there's a lot of people around you, probably in your community. I know this happened to me today. So I went running the other day, and I ran through the park, and there was just clusters and clusters of people because there was a softball tournament. And my initial reaction was like one of like, really, we're going to do this today? And I think that the thing that's difficult in these times is that we're all trying to traverse this unknown path. We're all going through this crisis. We're not, again, like this whole like we're all in this together thing, not at all what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is people relate to that in a very different, nuanced way, depending on your experiences, depending on your worldview. You're going to experience this thing differently. And so the thing that's hard about this is that the behavior that other people might exhibit, it makes sense to them. You know, the fact that those people made those choices, that completely made sense to them. It's actually my friend Dave Gray says this. He says, people's behavior makes sense to them. And if it doesn't make sense to you, then you're missing something. Right? And so this simulation activity, hard empathy, actually has to do with you taking on the worldview or the experiences or the life of someone who doesn't live at all or think at all like you. So that's hard empathy. And so to do it, one of the ways you can do this is you can think of, you know, the last time you saw some news stories about people from around the world, or the last time you encountered someone who just completely had a different set of behaviors than you would have, or reacted to life very differently than you would have. And I want you to think of that person. If you don't have one, well, first of all, you should be able to think of one, because I mean, most of the time you're surrounded by people who might not think or live like you would. I, for this, have thought of a friend of mine who spent some time in Karachi and saw the way that people were living there, and just like these the infestation of just dealing with the level of insects that like crawl around on everything, and the level of poverty that people were experiencing was something that he had never seen before. I think of my friend, and I did a podcast about this guy, Attilio D'Agostino, who was born with cystic fibrosis, and the way that he dealt with having that. You know, my first initial sort of reaction to it was, well, that would make me very nihilistic. You know, if I had something like cystic fibrosis and I thought that my time was very limited on the planet, what's the point? But he lives in a way that's almost free of any kind of limitations that most people put on him. And so you can begin to think, well, if I were to have something like that, if I were given the same set of circumstances, how might I react to the world? What would be different about me? Because that's what you're doing when you do hard empathy. So hard empathy, to complete the technique, you imagine you as that person. You don't imagine, like I wouldn't imagine that I was like Attilio's age, as an example. I would imagine that I was someone who went through the same kind of life experiences that he did. And how might I think about the world? You think about how you might feel. How would you react to the current crisis that we're all facing? How would you go about living your life? What would be important to you? This is hard empathy. And that's the completion of that technique. Does anybody have one? Carissa, do you have one already that you're willing to share?
Yeah, so just this morning I was introduced to, and you guys know how bad I am with names. I believe she's St. Louis City Councilwoman Kelly Dunaway, I believe is her name. And she was about a year younger than me, but grew up in a coal. First off, she set up her story. She grew up in a coal mining town in southern Illinois, and I'm like, is that a thing anymore?
Oh yeah, sure.
This era. So that separated her from me, and that she grew up in a very, very financially unstable home, and just kind of had this rags to riches, but then was in a horrible car accident that left her paralyzed her senior year, or after her senior year of high school. And then the phrase that she used said, but that wasn't acceptable to me. So she didn't accept this horrible tragedy, and she still has to walk with a cane, and she's a feminist. And so I just started thinking of like, just that physical limitation of how probably her opponents and her enemies use that to prove how she is not strong enough, or she, they may say that she uses that to her advantage to manipulate people. And just trying to put myself in her shoes of someone that is my counterpart and has, similar aspirations, but very different storylines. So that's what came to mind. To me, it's just someone I just met this morning.
Right. And so if you
I
simulate,
have a lot of things in common with her, but I don't.
Right. I'm sure you do. But like to simulate Carissa who went through that accident, Carissa is now developed this kind of point of view on the world, simulating what you might be doing right now if you had those experiences, is part of this technique. It helps you. Now, the other caution is you can, of course, be making wholesale assumptions. So it's not necessarily that you're trying to be completely accurate. The point is that you're at least making an attempt to get yourself out of your own worldview. You're disrupting your own worldview to simulate a different version of you.
I feel like I should call on Victoria again, just because I know some of her world experiences.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Victoria, do you have something to share? This is what's so awesome about not being, oh wait, Thomas, if you could unmute Victoria. This is what's so awesome about not being in the same room with people. She can't
punch you.
She can't punch me yet. I know next time she sees me, she will.
Okay.
Go for it.
I guess my question really is, as I meet people, it seems like some have more ability to have that hard empathy than others. I know for me, I think I sometimes feel like I have too much of it, because as I go through life and I look at the scenarios happening around me, you know, one of two things happens. I'm greatly inspired, or I'm greatly saddened by imagining how other people are suffering, especially right now when I watch the news. And so that's that. I mean, that I try to put myself in people's positions. I know I can't. It's just for a moment that I try to, but you know, I'll never know what it's like to be a Black man running through the streets in Georgia. You know what I mean? Right. So, but I try to do that. But I do wonder why it seems like there's a lot of people who just can't put themselves in other people's positions.
Yeah, I wish I could answer that question. I don't know either, but I do understand why you're arriving at that. And I would agree with you that it seems like, at least, and I would stress seems like some people have more ability. The only thing I would say is that I think, at least if two things are correct, if the science is correct on how our brains work and how we've developed and evolved, and if my own experiences mean anything, it's that most of us, we don't do this instinctually. So if you do have any ability at it, it's because you've cultivated it. You know, it's because at some point it served you well to be able to do this. And if nothing else, you know, especially in differentiating it from easy empathy, to know how someone might feel is one thing, right? To know, and you know, like even when you're in a situation with another person and they think that they know how you feel, like sometimes that's almost worse, right? Because they're going to practice the easy empathy on you. Gosh, it looks like you're angry. I guess we'll try to fix that. And that's not, you know, necessarily what we're trying to deal with. What we're trying to deal with here is, how could that person arrive at anger? Like, what makes sense about arriving at anger? You know, that's the question. You know, getting yourself into what would lead someone to these behaviors, conclusions. What if I were, and simulating it very realistically, as much as you can, what if I were living that? Where would I go? What would my priorities be? How would I feel? You know, and putting the skin on, so to speak, right? So I wish I had a better answer, but I only know that it's probably because, I know from the only bits of your story that I know about you, Victoria, that you've probably been put in situations where you needed to do it, you know, just so that you could get through. You know, you needed to be able to put yourself in someone else's life so that you could understand them better. So it's probably something you've cultivated because it served you, you know. It's probably the hardest of these three exercises. I mean, if you think about it, like I asked you to think about like a place you want to go and then someone you love and everything. And then I said hard empathy. Well, this is great, you know. So it can be kind of a bummer, I realize, but the point is that easy empathy does not necessarily work all the time. Like assuming how someone feels doesn't actually do the work of you simulating another reality for yourself. And also what it can do for you is if you can do this well, and it doesn't have to be like someone who's opposed to you necessarily, it's just someone who has life experiences that aren't like yours, it can create a burst of creativity within you. You can begin to see what's emergent. And this is, again, the theme, right? What is emergent about the present day? What's possible today that maybe I'm not considering? And the way to get at it isn't to think like harder about what's possible. The way to get at it is to think about, well, if I could simulate this different reality, then what else could be possible, right? What else could be, right? And you're also better able to win over difficult people, including yourself. We all can be difficult. We all can be stuck. We all can be stuck in our way of thinking. But if you think about this, you know, like, when was the last time you changed your mind, right? Like, when was the last time you changed your mind on something really important to you? Most of us, I have a hard time remembering the last time that I did, you know, completely shift my thinking on something. You know, it's hard. This is hard work. And if you can do this work to disrupt yourself, to simulate those alternate realities, you can better see what's emergent, what's possible, even when things don't feel like they could be. I'm not leaving a lot of time for Q&A, and I should probably, but my hope is that if you think about yourself in 10 years from now, after we do this, you know, after you've been able to do even just an instinctual level response to any of these prompts, or any of these techniques, that when you think about you in 10 years from now, that you think about someone you start to like. You know, you can think about someone that that you'd care for. And because, you know, if you're ultimately able to get yourself into that headspace, you can make better decisions today. You can allow for emergence. You can get through crisis moments. And in as much as we're talking about the future, what we're really talking about, as you probably noticed, is we talked about the past and the present day more than we talked about the future necessarily. So to try to get at what's possible, to try to simulate alternate realities for yourself, is to borrow from the same disciplines. And you can use that to create more possibility. I think that's basically everything. I have a handout that I can send to everybody. It's actually something you can do even with your family tonight, or you can do in your personal life, whatever you'd want to have done. You can use this, and it's actually called the Futures Wheel. It's another foresight technique that is very useful when it comes to just starting to have a structured way to brainstorm new ideas and new possibility. Possibility is how you get at the emergence question. It's how you get at resilience in the present day. 4 minutes.
So, you know, I'm sure all of us are like me right now, like my mind is blowing, and what keeps coming to mind is like, how do you make time for this? And then I'm feeling really stupid, because that's what we all have a lot of right now, is structured very differently. But I can remember my 8th grade home ec teacher mistakenly telling me that we all had 24 hours in a day, and it was how we used them. And I say mistakenly because I used to think that I needed to use all 24 hours of those awake.
Right.
And that sleep was for the week. But I think that the theme that we've seen through all 4 of these webinars is, one, that resiliency, no matter what lens you look through, is a process. And it's something that some people are born with more resiliency or more prospect for resiliency, but it's really a process of building up this muscle of skill sets and attitudes. And that's what I love about having you here, Jeremy, to wrap that up, is like, here's 3 very intentional activities that you can spend, as we showed, you could spend a minute on it, or you could spend 3 hours on it.
Right.
How deep you want to delve into that. And I know that there's a couple of people on the call that work, you know, specifically with certain demographics, so that it's these are important activities to bring up, whether it's with your own kids or your coworkers, or the populations that you work with.
Oh, for sure. Especially if you're dealing with someone who's feeling like, I'm stuck in today, there's nothing hopeful. I mean, one of the reasons that the poll question was the way it was, if in the present moment you're just feeling a lack of hope about what could be, and if you're feeling like you don't have any power in shaping the future, challenging people to do things like this, people on your team, it only takes a few seconds. It doesn't take very long, but it disrupts your thinking just enough that you can start to see, well, if that could be, then I wonder what else could be, you know, and you can open yourself to those ideas.
So we do have our last poll for you to kind of rate yourself of how powerful do you feel about shaping the future at this point. So it'll be a very interesting response as we wrap it up. I think it's one of the things to point out is that when we have a smaller group like this, I don't think it's by accident that people end up to the places that they are. And it's something that you probably felt passionate about or had questions about. And that's why it's important to take this information and turn it outward. So I really encourage you all to take the next couple of days to go back over these exercises that Jeremy has suggested, and really kind of dig down deeper into them. I think the things that also brought up to me was, Jeremy, you mentioned several times of disrupting ourselves. And I feel like so much of, I know for me personally, things with COVID, I feel like whatever's out there, whether it's disease or economy or people, or usually it's people, that they're disrupting me, and that you feel that lack of control.
Right.
I choose to disrupt myself. That puts me in a better state of control. And I liked that. I like that phrase a lot. I also like that I didn't even think about resiliency being a part of self-care. So we talked about in our last webinar for resiliency for caregivers and compassion fatigue, that self-care is more than chocolate and bubble bath. And I didn't think about kind of recognizing who our future selves will be as being self-care. You mentioned a lot about finding that someone that you care about, and finding that person that you would take care of in the future, and liking that person in the future. So from a health and well-being standpoint, I think that's really something for us to kind of noodle on as well. So awesome. Everyone's feeling remotely powerful about shaping the future, which
Sevens are good. Sevens, you've got to take a 7.
Really accurate. Of like, more than it's better than a 1. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here today, especially you, Jeremy, for taking time to do this for us. This does wrap up this resiliency webinar. We will start our next webinar series in August. Thank you. In July, actually. We switch into workplace wellness, and Valerie Beeson will kick us off with how to mean what you say and say what you mean, especially in the workplace. And we will have, that will be a 3-part workplace wellness webinar series. If you aren't familiar with this and you don't subscribe to our newsletter, I encourage you to go to our website at communitystrongscc.org. We have lots and lots of resources, blogs, videos, and then all of our partners in our coalition work is there as well. We are kicking off a workplace wellness certification program. So if you're interested in bringing health and well-being to the workplace, that will start on July 1 as well. I do want to thank our commissioners again of BJC St. Charles County, SSM St. Charles County, St. Luke's Mercy, and Economic Development Council for supporting our efforts as Community Strong. And thank you all again. Thank you, Jeremy. And this has been recorded, and it will be sent out to you all with the additional resources that Jeremy has shared in the chat box. So everyone just keep taking one step closer to a healthier you and a healthier community. Thank you.